Yes.
Yes, first of all, welcome everyone, and thank you all for making it. This was supposed to be an internal call, but we have so many bright minds, advisors, mentors, mechanism designers, collaborators around us that are also interested in these topics that we are building and the design space that we want to enable. So we thought it would be very valuable in actually opening it up to feedback, how we approach designing some modules that are actually like core primitives of the blockchain space. And I call them like sovereignty protocols that are so powerful in facilitating use cases that are very novel and allow us to create actually alternative ways of creating, distributing, and sharing value. And bonding curve for most of us in the room holds a dear place in that regard. So we want to kick this feedback session off with the bonding curves, and we aim to kind of get a feedback and also get questions that will inform us in how we approach designing the way we want to implement bonding curve in our architecture. And in this presentation, we will go over previous deployments in the space, our observations, what is our architecture, and how to situate bonding curves within Inverter's architecture, and how we approach the design space to open it up for discussion. We will have also more detailed agenda, but I just want to open it up and shut my mouth to give it to Marvin and Pablo, who did the actual work in the bonding curves and will be presenting today. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you. So let me start first. Welcome to the deep dive into the Inverter's bonding curve design. Maybe a quick introduction from my side. My name is Marvin, Solidity Dev. Have worked on previously on all the PrimeDAO products, Collectivo, also on the Toucan bridge, and have recently joined working on the Inverter module. Let me pass over to Pablo for his introduction.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Pablo. I'm also a smart contract dev, and I've been working with Inverter smart contracts since the beginning, basically. And I also love bonding curves. I learned about them when I was at the TC, and since then I've been a big fan. And I'm going to share my screen, I think, so we can continue.
Pablo, so sorry. Maybe we could do like a really quick round of like introduction.
Yeah, sure.
So that was actually next on my notes that I see, but you guys luckily don't. No, as far as introduction for everyone, I think it makes sense to do a quick round and maybe have one sentence of what you're excited about within the bonding curve space. And to sort of avoid the awkward silence, I would say everyone who has went is denominating the next one. So let me go first, and maybe my answer is a bit biased, but I'm excited about how the Inverter architecture enables a whole range of possible bonding curve configuration. And I pass it to Omer.
Sure. Hello everyone. So I'm a partner, a general partner at a ventures fund, but I'm personally interested in bonding curves, and I think around 3 years ago I had a failed attempt of creating personal tokens, and back then they weren't super popular. Right now with Friendtech and so on, personal tokens may seem to have be a bit more popular back then, but so that was my previous interest in bonding curves in general. Lately I was actually exploring like discrete bonding curves and how they're related to some of the discrete liquidity AMMs, and how actually they could improve upon them. And so that's been basically my recent focus, and I'm happy to learn from you all in this session. And I'll kick the ball to maybe Marvin.
Thank you. Yeah, Marvin. I'm from ByteRocket. Yeah, I've been involved with the inverter since its inception, kind of, as one of the main architects and developers in the beginning. Yeah, I've worked on many different projects. I've also worked on bonding curves before, but not on inverter and bonding curves. So that's why I'm excited to be here as well. Let's go with Jeff.
Hey all. I do engineering communications at Block Science, previously with the Common Stack and TEC. I'm really excited about bonding curves and how they can enable a future of microeconomics, how we can or emulate the positive sum redistributive economies of nature using some of these new tools, and particularly how to make them easier to deploy, easier to parameterize without having to go through smart contract coding, auditing, all of that stuff. So really excited to be in this room with such great minds working towards that goal. And I'll pass to Justice.
What's up, guys? My name is Justice. I work at Polygon Labs doing DAO ecosystem development. Super interested in token engineering and mechanism design, and really eager to start building DAOs like smart people, you know. Yeah, and then me and some of these guys were jamming for like hours and hours straight at ECC on new ways of mechanisms that could be used, and like bullish on what was it, Ponzonomics. So and I will pass to Trent M, and I'm wondering if this is the Trent M.
Hi guys, let's see here. I have a new computer, so okay, here we go. Well, there's lots of Trent M's and lots of other Trents out there. There's a really famous UK soccer player now, I guess. I'm just a guy. I love to code. I love to talk nerdy things and build. I've had a hand in token engineering since the earliest days. And before token engineering, I was actually there when Simon de Louvier was inventing bonding curves, and that was a very fun time too. They came from various angles, right? There was Simon's angle, and then there was all this discussion around AMMs among Martin and Vitalik and others. So yeah, I'm very excited about bonding curves in Ocean Days. Yeah, I'm especially excited about bonding curves for curation and discovery, where you have authentic signals, because people have to put their money where their mouth is. So very excited to see what you guys have here today.
Or do you pass it to Trent?
Right. Let's see here. So who hasn't gone yet? Pablo, have you gone?
Yeah, I started, but I think
Right.
Bora hasn't gone yet.
Okay, go for it.
Hey, I'm Bora. So I've been working with Inverter team like 8 months, and actually I'm a Web2 developer, and I am a learner in Web3 ecosystem. So these things are pretty new for me, and I'm trying hard to understand what's going on in this ecosystem. So regarding bonding curves, I don't have much information about those, thanks to Ata and Alp and other wonderful people working with us. I'm trying to learn these things and improve myself. But from what I experience from now, I can tell about the inverter, what we are building. I think it will change the ecosystem a lot, the way how developers are looking into the development, the ecosystem, the simulation, deployment, etc. I think we are making these things easier for everybody. And I don't know who is next, but Jessica.
Only Jessica. Yeah,
Yes.
left.
Yeah.
Hey, don't worry, Bora. No one knows what's going on here. We're just a bunch of consciousnesses inhabiting bodies on some spinning planet in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, we'll figure it out. Hi, I'm Jess. I have been in the ecosystem for some time, primarily coming in through Common Stack after, I don't know what's early crypto anymore. I started investing in crypto in 2014 and then really started going down the rabbit hole and then discovered its potential for impact when I met the Common Stack in 2020. Also communications and research at Block Science. Primarily interested in Ponzinomics for the commons, also how we can move beyond price as an indicator of what our capacities are, interested in how bonding curves can help us to relocalize currency and being able to have a say in how the money is issued and how value is assigned. Really excited as well in some of the mechanisms' capacity to express multiple parameters so we can stop externalizing all the shitty things that come because there are no externalities since we live in one planet. So hyper aware of not just the mechanisms and the how and the what, but also the why. In why are we building this? And really excited for the proposal Inverter to, I think, free up and enable the flows so we don't have these money swamps when the planet's on fire and we need, capital to move, like trillions of dollars in capital to move in order to do things. So I think there's so much potential, even though we're down a very, far down the rabbit hole. It's really important work. So I'm supporting also education and token engineering with the Token Engineering Academy, like writing grants for CAD, doing whatever I can to just support the kind of very inner workings of the open source ecosystem, which is poorly funded for the huge work of responsibly and ethically developing the public infrastructure that we're working on. So happy also beyond this call to collaborate together, as there's so many brilliant people here in networks and resources and influence. So I'd love to also see the proposer Inverter flourish, and happy to be included in this call to hear the great things you guys have built, and happy to connect also beyond this call to discuss some of the work happening in open source and what's needed to free up people and resources. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. I think we can begin with the presentation.
Awesome. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. And I'll yield to Marvin.
Yes, me too. All right. So as far as the purpose of today's call, I think I mentioned it already, but the purpose is to present what we've been designing and get a feedback from domain experts within the bonding curve space and mechanism design. Our agenda, we have 3 overarching points. So one, we go briefly over previous bonding curve implementation, understanding what functionalities have been implemented in the past and what can we learn from them. The next point will be where we're going to go walkthrough of the inverter's architecture and our bonding curve implementation. And then lastly, we transition towards the design space that our implementation opens up in tandem with the inverter logic modules, and open up the floor for feedback and questions. So the first implementation study that we did was for Aragon. Aragon is a DAO creation and management platform with no code required. Where no code is required, some of the key observations that we made are a single point of entry for all user interactions, as well as for the admin to control the behavior of the bonding curve. This enables centralized management of the whole fundraising related contract. Then they also employ a tap mechanism, which manages all the outflow of reserve assets, like or the configurable parameters of the outflow of assets, like the percentages, the timeframes. Their implementation also links a governance module to it to update these rules. And in this way, there's like an extra protection that no single malicious actor access to these assets. Then one other thing that we observed are the contracts responsible for determining the quantity of tokens. Let's call the formula contract is abstracted into its own contract. And by abstracting the formula logic into a separate contract, it enables the possibility to update the formula at a later point. And lastly, their AMM makes use of batching for the issuing and redeeming of tokens. And by batching, they mitigate front-run attacks for issuing, and it allows for a uniform exit price for the redeeming, mitigating the mass exit problems. The next one we looked at are the token engineering commons and their bonding curve. The Token Engineering Commons is an open source collective governed initiative focused on fostering a token economy to advance ethical public goods. The bonding curve got deployed in 2 phases. Some functionalities here to highlight were within the initial phase, the issuing of tokens went along the lines of an ICO style fundraising. Making use of a fundraising in this fashion opened up the possibility to see how much capital they collected before designing what to do with it. Then within the transition phase, the funds were eventually split between a common pool and a reserve, whereby the tokens for the reserve were used to initiate the bonding curve. This enabled that part of the assets could be, one second, closing the window. This enabled that part of the assets could fund the mission of the commons, where the other on the other side, all phase 1 token holders got token distributed pro rata, giving each the same price. And then the final phase, within the final phase, minting tokens incurred a fee, and tokens slowly fall until they are fully liquid. Imposing a sell tax provides, of course, a revenue stream for the system in its whole. Then the next one we looked at is Juicebox. Juicebox is an open source protocol that enables creators to launch, fund, and manage the different kinds of projects. Instead of a price curve, Juicebox makes use of a redemption curve, which set along a redemption percentage. So redemption takes place on a bonding curve where early redeemers get less ETH per token and later redeemers get more. They employ a concept of overflow, which is used as a project's runway as well as a refund mechanism. So this is allowing future funding cycles to access this overflow within distribution limits set by the project. And the overflow allows community members to exit with a portion of the treasury's funds by redeeming their community tokens. Then the next point, the project makes use of cycles, which are used to preserve the rules, let's say, for a given cycle, in which all of the past points are defined. So the redemption value, the overflow, all of them are defined within these cycles. The cycles are lockable, which creates a sense of trust and signals the project's intent to their holders. And then finally, they make use of different arguments, or in this case, make use of a argument to signal if you want your tokens, receive your tokens staked or directly. I think it's just something to highlight because it's good UX, because the user doesn't have to do 2 transactions. And then lastly, we looked at in the implementation research study is the meToken. The meToken enables the creation of personal tokens. I mean, was already brought up. It's now very in, let's say. It features a diamond pattern, which enables all kind of functionalities within this diamond pattern. One of it is they have the bonding curves in a central hub. The bonding curve in this context is used to create a market for the personal token. These hubs that they offer make it easy for meToken holders or say creators to subscribe on different types of configurations of bonding curves that already are created, and by doing it, inheriting all the hub's vault and underlying assets. And then they have created a specialized bonding curve formula, let's say Banker formula, using a different math library than the other ones. So in summary, and I think it's been summarized well here, so I'm just going to read it out loud. Given the vastness of the potential use cases and the expansive design space, it's impossible to address everything in a single deployment. I think that's one big learning factor. And then our strategy also emphasizes core functionalities, forming a base that the inverter logic modules can extend. So for creating different building blocks, and then the community can utilize these foundational building blocks to enhance functionality. And what are the base building blocks that we decided upon? The one would be having a single contract, which should serve as a primary hub to streamline all the user engagement, as well as the admin's capability for modifying all the different factors of the bonding curve. Then it's smart to have the contract determining the token issuance in a separate contract. So that's another functionality that's very important. This structuring enables, of course, the flexibility to adjust the formula later, or have same bonding curve configurations, or let's say functionalities, except for the formula, which also creates a new sort of design space. Then the other one is it should have a sort of tap mechanism, of course, so the withdrawal of assets is managed other than only by a single address. And then, of course, it needs an automated market maker as a primitive, as a building block. So let me transition here to Pablo, and also let me tell that I'm actually one of the things it's interesting to bring up. I'm the first external developer coming into the inverter architecture, and the part of my aim was also to see how developer friendly the protocol is to actually develop a module and add to it. And so it makes sense to hand over to someone who knows the architecture a lot better than me from the beginning. Take it away.
Thanks, Marvin. Yeah, I'll just try to give a quick overview of the inverted architecture before we get on to look into the details of the actual bonding curve implementation we did. So basically, our goal with this architecture is to enable building different workflows out of a small set of smart contract modules. So we divide the most common workflows into separate components and just create modules that can be switched in and out from our architecture, and allow in this way flexible systems that can grow with usage. So we have 4 main types of modules in our architecture. We have the funding manager, which this bonding curve would fall into, which basically is the module that manages the inflow of assets into this workflow. So the actual implementation of this funding manager, we try to keep it as agnostic as possible. It can be a normal vault, it can be a staking system with a time lock, or in this case, it can be a bonding curve, which is a fundraising mechanism which issues also tokens as receipts. And these the funds are held in the funding manager and operated on by logic modules. Logic modules just perform different kinds of logic. The most basic example would be something like a bounty manager, where you set up a bounty, people submit claims to have completed that bounty and get payouts for it. But it can be more advanced stuff. It can be a staking mechanism that checks stuff in other parts of the chain. It can be just a yield module that uses different strategies to achieve yield on the existing funds. It's as open and as modular as possible. Once all these funds are processed and are ready to leave the system through a different place, we have the payment processor, which manages distribution of the funds to, for example, workers or beneficiaries in a wider sense. Again, we are trying to be as agnostic as possible. It can be just a simple payout, but it can also be a superfluid stream, a Sablier stream, a vesting period, whatever you want. A part of that, of course, we have this fourth type of module, which is the authorizer, which sits above and manages the permissions and privileges that will govern the system. And all these four modules are tied together by our main orchestrator contract, which basically maps out the relationships between them and offers some core functionalities like adding a module, removing a module, and just general transaction execution systems. So I hope this gave you a small overview. So now I give it back to Marvin so he can get into the details of what he did with this bonding curve module. You're muted, Marvin.
Thank you. All right, so as stated before, yes, let's open up. Does anyone have a question around the inverter architecture? I'm not sure if let's ask out. But was it the plan to open up the floor, or maybe to have it?
Oh no, no. I was curious if anyone has a question. Like most of the people here knows it. We talked about it very, like, you know, extensively. But just wanted to ask, in case. Sorry.
No, all good. Yeah, and also at the end we open up the floor as well. So as stated before, our aim, or within the summary, came at the research. We found out it's just too many different use cases to account for, let alone all the possible future use cases. So our aim is just to provide building blocks for community, as well as within the bonding curve, or let's say the funding vault, as well as within the logic modules for all kind of configuration. And this also may be, this might be a good place to already introduce the question that I have at the end around feedback. And this is namely, so you can keep it in mind, is what would you be considering, what would you consider to be base functionalities? Because what we try to do is distill some base functionalities and then build some blocks around it. So these base functionalities are a single entry point contract. I think they're basically, maybe no need to go into too much detail, they're basically the same as in the summary. So the single entry point contract for users, as well as administrators, to enable a centralized management of the whole bonding curve related contracts, then a tap mechanism to control the outflow, which adds another layer of protection for the outflowing assets, then encapsulating the formula contract, which abstracting the formula logic into its separate contract enables modularity, as well as it can house more complex specialized logic for that implementation. And then of course the building block needs to have a market maker in itself. And then our aim, of course, is built for extendability, so that we build abstract base functionalities into composable building blocks, which we have a late joiner, which can be used as a foundation to extend functionality. So what kind of building blocks have we built? So the first building block would be, of course, enabling the issuance of tokens. It has functionalities for issuing tokens, setting and subtracting of the fee, as well as enabling and disabling of these functionalities. What this base contract does as well, it enforces the upstream contract to implement a formula contract. The second building block that we created is a redeeming functionality. So this building block, this contract inherits from the other functionality. So it has all of the issuance functionality and extends it with redeeming functionalities. So redeeming tokens through a bonding curve, again, setting and subtracting the fee, as well as enabling and disabling of this redemption functionality. It also enforces an upstream contract to implement a formula contract. The last two building blocks that we've created are a virtual supply bases. So they are, of course, very similar. One manages a virtual token supply, the other one, the virtual reserve or collateral supply. They enable functionalities for adding tokens to the virtual supply or subtracting it, getting the virtual supply, as well as setting it. And this is for both the token as well as the collateral. And it is just an overview of the building blocks that we created. And this brings us to the next slide, which basically is our first implementation. So the implementation here is, of course, the bonding curve research group's investable workstream. It inherits all of the other building blocks. So the issuance redeemings, the virtual token supply base, as well as the virtual collateral supply base, and adds some functionalities that are all that extend functionalities from the original building blocks, adds to it, and then also implementing very specific functionalities that are relational to the formula in this case. So calculating the issuing and redeeming, setting the reserve ratio, as well as it enables the withdrawal of the collateral into the rest of the inverter architecture. And so this is one implementation. This is the implementation that we've built right now. But I would like to then highlight go over what the way we structured with these building blocks, how that opens up the design space. This design space happens basically different stages within the inverter network. One is within the funding vault, which is the sort of overarching term for the, let's say, the part where the tokens flow in. And then we also have a whole design space possibility within the logic modules. So let's say we want to extend some base functionality. I just took two examples from the implementation research that we did, where Aragon had some batching. I think Juicebox had also some that you could, could immediately stake tokens. So what if we would like to implement that functionality within the inverter bonding curve? So the only thing that we needed to do right now is basically create another base contract, which is a staking issued token base. The staking, just wanted to highlight that the staking could actually happen within the funding vault, but could also happen at different parts within the process. And then we add another building block, which would be a issuance and redeeming batch bonding curve base, which adds possible functionalities like storing the variables, tracking who has bought, who's trying to redeem, batching those, claim functionalities, these sort of things. And it would, of course, inherit from our earlier building blocks, which are the issuance and redeem bonding curve base. So basically, someone would need to, community member, whoever would need to design two different new base contracts and inherit from our base issuance and redeeming bonding curve. And then we can go to the next slide. We would immediately have a totally different beast, let's say, which is a bonding curve that enables batching, staking, issuing, and redeeming. It could also implement a different formula contract. All of that would eventually be managed in the final implementation contract that you see here, that I named with a very long name: staking, batched, issuing, and redeeming bonding curve funding manager. So this is one example of how we open up the possibility for community devs or whoever to extend the base functionalities that we already created, and then easily add on top within the funding vault. A funding vault side of the architecture. Let me open this up. It's supposed to implement a supply-based unlock mechanism. Yeah, so I'm curious. So what I would like to do is maybe go to Pablo. He's going to go over some of the possibilities within the logic module, and then at the end, happy to to bring this up and see how that would be implemented within the inverter architecture. Your question, Omer. All right. To you, Pablo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so Marvin explained a bit what possibilities we have inside the bonding curve itself. And I just wanted to take some minutes to explain what design space this opens in the context of our whole architecture. So the first example I want to use is a very basic one that also Marvin mentioned, which is the investable workstream, which was kind of the thing that we set up together with the bonding curve research group, which set this whole process in motion, which basically are designed by making this, making the collateral virtual, or the accounting of the collateral a virtual variable, allows us to take the funds out and use them for something else. In this case, a bounty manager that helps spend the funds on the research, and you can create where the bonding curve research group can create bounties and have people claim them, and in that way, perform actual work while still giving the donors a proof of their contribution in the form of the bonding curve tokens. The nice thing about this is that given our system, if in the future, when this if the project grows and it gets a wide enough user base and they choose to decentralize, you can easily just switch out the authorizer from the ownership structure that it has to a new, let's say, voting enabled mechanism, which can use the already given out tokens as the token voting mechanism. So you can actually do the step to decentralization inside the system itself without any bigger changes. But this is just one example. If you go into another more DAO-like structures, for example, what this allows us to do is to not have the collateral of the bonding curve sitting idle in a place, but, for example, be used instead of a lending pool, say Aave, and earn yield, and use that yield either to fund the treasury or, also reinvest that yield by buying burning tokens, creating a rising price floor. It just lets you do it gives you a lot of freedom without having to touch the base bonding curve contract, and just by pointing to the new logic module. Even if we get a bit more crazy, you are not bound to use the normal accounting system. You can change the formula like Marvin explains. So you could, for example, reference other parts inside of the workflow. You could use, for example, instead of the deposited amount, you could use the value that has been enabled through the workflow as the measure on which to determine the minting price. You could say, okay, we have spent $500,000 on research, so that is what we use to mint the token. Or you can actually maybe invert it and use the actual treasury state, but the lower the treasury amount, the cheaper your tokens are to incentivize people to buy. And of course, you can even go more crazy and play around directly with the virtual balance while keeping the supply constant or not, to change the shape of the curve depending on the situation of your protocol. You can have a workflow that starts with a steep curve and then it gets flatter over time, or not. And you can switch that out even during the life cycle of your workflow, which we think is a very interesting and powerful primitive. To get back to for example, the use case of friend tech that we talked about with the social tokens. If we wanted to adapt that to our architecture, for example, it would be a really basic bonding curve with an authorizer. We wouldn't even be using a payment processor, maybe the logic module to do some extra gating stuff for the social media part if necessary. But at the end of the day, it's just the friend tech is using a very steep bonding curve to incentivize speculation. In our case, you could just even modify that and make it flatter depending on the type of community you want to build. We could even use that and create a logic module to interface with stuff like Lens and enable a similar thing in Lens without having to go through their proprietary platform. Yeah, so this is just basically a quick overview of the whole design space this opens, which we are very excited about. And yeah, I hope I was able to give you a taste of what's possible. And I'll give it back to you, Marvin.
Yeah, so to conclude, I would open up the floor, general questions, if anyone has some, and then of course we also have a more directed question. What would you consider to be base functionalities, and what are bonding curve use cases you can envision? And we can look how they would fit into or be enabled by the inverter architecture. Go ahead.
Please, curious.
Hey guys. I jumped in about 15 minutes ago, but it seems like I saw most of the features that you guys are planning on building into this smart contract. One thing that I've been thinking about is this redeeming function. So, it's kind of complicated because of, the reserve ratio and the price of the token, and like, well, how do you just enable this kind of redeeming function after it's been disabled for a year? You need to fund the reserve pool or blah, blah, blah. So what I was thinking is kind of like this balance between the specificity of a product and the simplicity of a product. Is what if you guys remove this redeem function, right? So two different functions, fund to mint, redeem to burn. Remove the burning function and instead tailored this more towards like a dividend model. So at some point, what could be enabled was the issuance of dividends to token holders. I guess the idea of removing the burn to mint is to simplify the amount of options that a user has when they're deploying a bonding curve to make it easier. And then the dividend share just kind of solves the where do you get the capital to fund the reserve pool to allow for redeeming and burning, blah, blah, blah. And it immediately plays, like, imagine it immediately enables people to, okay, fund a project they believe in, to get a token, and if that project becomes profitable, for them to share a dividend based on their revenue to their token holders. And that's like a killer simple use case that seems like easy to understand and is like we're all familiar with. Just my thoughts there.
Yeah, I would say, I think it's an amazing idea. I think that's also something that's very easy to implement, using the issuance bonding curve base and then adding some sort of dividend contract that let the owners of the project decide on what they want to share back to the community. And so definitely going to, I think it's definitely a really great use case and something, very useful.
It seems like also it would just help to create a friction of the flow. I saw that you had, Pablo, the feature there, and I also said I was excited about that because I think it will do a lot for squad DAOs and guild DAOs. But yeah, I think like, I don't know, kind of looking from like a physics perspective, it's just like, it's like a friction on the flows. And I think part of the non-sustainability or these cascade failures are coming from the quick dumps or like the ability, even feature wise, you're literally controlling the action space by removing that as a feature. If you can't just burn back to the curve, if you don't even have that option, your only option is dividend, then it, I think, increases the sustainability or like just helps to just have the flows not be so rapid that like a ton is getting sold and then slippage and whatnot. So it's kind of almost like when you're, what is it, like when you freeze your tokens, sorry, my brain, it's early here, like vesting, it's like vesting but on the backside. It's like you're almost like just, I don't know, anyway, slowing the rate. And it feels like a really good idea from that perspective.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really cool use case, and And it fits very well with our design. I think already, Marvin, we have this option to deactivate the burn already in our contracts.
Yeah, so it's actually for our first, so our investable work stream that we're building on, there a redeeming was required in that can be switched on and off. So that's why it's already in there, but it's actually when deployed, it should be switched off. And yeah, it's up to the project owners to decide to switch it on or not. But of course, a bonding curve funding manager, so it can also just be deployed with just the issuance bonding curve base, as well as another, like the example, a different kind of, not even redeeming, but issuing dividends module, let's say.
Hi guys, thanks for the presentation, and it's nice to see the various modules and stuff, and the aim to have something really reusable and whatnot. So what is the level of maturity of this right now? Here there's slides. I gather that there's implementations of this. Have simulations been done at all? Any verification? Any toy dApps built on top, etc.?
So I think there are different sides to this question. One is the inverter architecture has been being built on for, maybe someone can answer it, for quite some time now, with lots of testing, lots of also reaching out into the community to get input there. In terms of this bonding curve module that I'm building, that is something that has been in development for a month now, and that's why also a lot of code is already there. But the idea here was, of course, also to reach out for feedback before putting in more work, get early feedback, and then test further and get more people involved.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Yeah, with the core smart contract system are already built, and we have some testnet deployments. We are still not in production. We have some partners we're working with. We're moving towards that goal at this moment. But the core is built, and we have been testing it. We have been doing integration testing. We have several modules which are done, other which are in planning, and we are switching them out, trying to build different stuff with them. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, partly, I guess. So you've got testing that basically things are working together, the components are glued together, and they're working in the integration testing and the basic tests probably. So that's more sort of on the digital logic verification side. And I'm wondering more about the token dynamics themselves too, like the analog verification, if you will, which, things that are continuous in time or continuous in value. Do you have testing or verification in that, being from running simulations or otherwise?
No, for now, this is actually the first module we are using that issues tokens. For now, we just had all the funding manager is it's a rebasing funding manager, which also gives you a token, but it's not tradable. It's just as a receipt for your deposit, so you can get back your share. So so we don't have any simulations yet about the token movement dynamics that a thing like this bonding curve module would enable.
Right.
But
okay.
Again, this is a beginning. We are giving this out to feedback rounds. So yeah, but it's
absolutely. Thank you. No, I it's a really good starting point. And to me, I put myself in the shoes of someone who's looking to maybe deploy this at some point. I'd be asking, okay, how hardened is this? What are the corner cases where incentives could be messing up, etc. Right? And so for simple building blocks, even simple building blocks aren't so easy, right? Think about you say just like streaming tokens, right? To do a really good job in that takes a lot of effort to but really nailing down measuring, testing and stuff, right? So there's a lot more stuff going on here, especially when you have the analog dynamics. And so to help potential deployers build confidence, it's something you'll probably want to just layer in over time and consider. So given that there's a lot of bonding curves bring a lot of token dynamics, right? And by history, right? probably a very nice example is the early work done on Token Engineering Commons. Jeff was a part of that, I believe, and maybe Jessica. And they have a really cool simulator visualizing this, right? And CircuitLand, this obviously is too. And there's, now these token simulators out there like CAD and more. So yeah, I'm not expecting you guys to have done this yet, but I think it will be very useful for people when they're trying to choose which parameters to have simulations for this.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah,
That's
and also
something,
thank you for the valuable feedback. Sorry, go ahead, because it's valuable feedback.
Yeah, it's very, very valuable. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that it's totally true. And also in the token engineering commons, when we did the hatch, we also learned a lot doing this whole parameter calls about how wildly different the same 4 building blocks can end up just by playing around with parameters that define the. So it's definitely a very important point.
And even related to that, right? So I think it was pretty cool watching what was going on with the hatch and all that. But at the same time, Token Engineering Commons moved to a different model because that particular model, even though there was lots of conversation, at the end, it wasn't sustainable, right? So now it's moved to more of a Gitcoin style model, for example, right? So at the end of the day, whatever people deploy in their project, it has to ultimately lead to, imagine the thing running for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Can the people within the DAO, the project, et cetera, feed themselves, right? So I would say bias your designs to sustainability, right? And a comment from someone else earlier was, simplify. Curious Rabbit, it said, simplify because it just helps overall. And I can say I fully agree with that. I think adding constraints can be freeing, right? Because it rails towards the things that are truly useful. And the constraint I would suggest is rail towards designs that are naturally sustainable for the teams that deploy them, right? So, the original bonding curve conviction voting mechanism didn't quite work. That's fine. It was cool. Lots of conversations. But in the end, a different model needed to be deployed because at that higher level, it wasn't quite sustainable. So that's something to consider here too. And this is life. This is how it goes, right? In Ocean, we've changed a lot of our token dynamics over the years too. So think about this. Ultimately, the projects can only stick around if they're sustainable. So, and bonding curves, as Jessica and others have pointed out, around guilds and so on, bonding curves can be super, super useful. So bias the bonding curve designs, if you can, towards sustainable designs. And that will help a lot and simplify the space for your users that might use this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's very, thank you for your very thoughtful feedback. It's awesome. Thank you so much.
And just to build on that, I think I see this toolkit as almost like a fractal layer down from the sort of like DAO bonding curve and conviction voting, because it felt one of the difficulties that I saw in that experiment was the benefits or the drive of the DAO was a little too amorphous. And I think bringing it down a layer to the squad DAO or the working group level really makes those deliverables much more concrete and like a tighter feedback cycle, I guess, between the funder and the outcomes with a squad around specific goals. And also speaking to a couple of the points Trent made on simulation and understanding how these tools work. Actually, I'm really excited that Inverter and the BCRG, Bonding Curve Research Group, are working closely together on this because we're more or less trying to bootstrap, dog food some of these tools, test them, simulate them while we're playing around with some of the functionality. And actually, a couple of points through the presentation, the Inverter really reminds me of the generalized bonding curve that I don't think it got very far, but there was a group, in the early days of the Aragon Black bonding curve, the Fairmint bonding curve, the TEC bonding curve. There were some of these sort of like repeated functions in different parts, the tap mechanism versus the hatch. There were kind of like mirror implementations in a few different places. And we always talked about unifying that into a single implementation where you could just check on or check off each of these functions. And I see that in the inverter architecture much more than a lot of these sort of like early reference implementation deployments. So I'm really excited about that. One of the things I wanted to, I guess, ask about was this virtual supply and virtual reserve, it brings a lot of flexibility, but I'm also concerned it could introduce risk in terms of if it's deployed improperly, are there, you know, user risks that need to be protected against, downside risks in terms of being able to manipulate supply or reserve without, or yeah, I guess how to manage the downside risk of that without having the system explode on unsuspecting users. Curious if you've put any thought into that so far.
Yeah, so we did put some thought into it. I think we have also enabled different checks within the contracts to sort of, you know, safeguard for it. But of course, this if you decide to deploy such a model, it does create a lot of, you know, gives the owners a lot of control. So it also depends on, okay, the risk for the user. It's hard to maybe protect against it because maybe the owners do want to actually manipulate it in such a way, right? So we of course are looking for the sort of technical explosion, let's say, right, where someone wants to redeem assets that are not there, but then this does not protect against an owner who actually wants to manipulate it in such a way, right? And then, of course, this is also some of, you know, the responsibility of the one who actually a user who interfaces with the bonding curve if they are aware of, you know, that there's a virtual supply and it's a manipulatable.
Yeah, I totally agree with Marvin. And I think the moment you move away from the actual on-chain balance to just virtual accounting, you enter let's say a danger zone or a place where a lot of stuff can happen. I think for this first iterations, by deactivating the burn mechanism and the redeeming for collateral, we address the lot of those issues, because you're kind of assuming that you're giving these funds for the research group or whoever to spend. So you're not expecting something back, so you can't be cheated out of the funds. But of course, once we expand to more use cases and generalize this, it's something we should definitely keep in mind and be very clear about the risks or the privileged access to the different parts of the curve and who can manipulate that and where and in which way.
Yeah, or maybe there's a way to, assuming users will interface through a UI built by the Inverter network to sort of signal to them like, hey, this is makes use of a virtual supply. So someone can, you know, make a decision there to engage with the bonding curve.
I know we've been talking simplicity, so I'm a little hesitant. However, I think one of the use cases that's coming up for me, Jeff was talking about multi-currency reserves the other day, and I know Atta, he was chatting with you a little bit about how to possibly do that. But I think one of the other use cases are like trying to tie in co-fi or like mutual staking is what EXA calls it, Economic Space Agency, is the ability to kind of take in another group's. So I'm envisioning, you know, the major use case that I'm excited about, like we've been talking about, is a squad DAOs. So we have all this, you know, open source or not open source, whatever, primitive development, research development, education that needs to be funded. How can we make it easy to co-vest with each other and have this like mutual staking where, and I think this is expressed in some groups doing partnerships by like a swap and burn, but like what are potential feature sets or what are the things in a design, whether they're there already, or that we can envision around making it easy for groups to co-vest and do like mutual staking via having a token of another group in their reserve. So like, again, this is like getting into a certain level of complexity, but I don't want to like automatically go to a multi-currency thing because that gets complicated, but like, just you guys are the, you know, the design wizards of like, how is it possible, or what is the easiest way to like be able to co-vest so that these groups can mutually stake and or be able to function with each other's kind of like treasuries or bonding curves. And it's more of an open question than I I have an answer.
Yeah, I don't have a direct answer right now, but I think it's a very interesting use case, which I've also sometimes thought about, especially if you add, like I mentioned before, this idea of using the collateral as in some yield generating way, so depositing a lending protocol or staking it on the protocol itself where the DAO is based. So in that way, once you use actual collateral to generate a yield, the act of buying into another project's bonding curve and keeping the tokens is actually benefiting them. And by doing, instead of token swaps, we just are waiting for the other team to dump, to speak clearly, by this buying into each other's bonding curve, you're actually supporting each other in a very different way. And I think it's very interesting.
And he's gone
right now, but I think it's something that's definitely worth exploring. Oh. Yeah, and please, Marvin.
No, you froze for a second.
Oh, good. Sorry.
Yeah. I also see Ömer put a question in the chat. If you would like to ask, Ömer.
Just to add on, like just what Jessica's saying, like because during our DAO times, like like a couple years back, we were also considering like how could we create like governance participation alignment, especially with Aragon DAO. And we were thinking about like maybe we could implement like slashing mechanisms if the DAO participant, like you could vote with your LPs basically, and you could whitelist like to governance, let's say Aragon and during that time prime. How could you introduce like slashing mechanism to the LP? And like, or now that's what Jessica is telling me, like if you could kind of create a bundle tokens like of these bonding curves, two bonding curves of two different DAOs, let's imagine, and that enables you somehow like participate in governance, that you could introduce like a slashing through non-participation as well, like somehow. But anyways, just wanted to share that for the future, since the call is being recorded.
Yeah, there's lots of exciting stuff that can be done. I think it's a very, very exciting space.
I thought you were saying, so I actually didn't have the chat open, sad, but you were saying a question, or maybe the one that Jeff is
stating? Take the question on the chat. I just
reposted it.
Yeah, so indeed, I think that's actually not something, or it is something that's already quite easily possible. I would say you would create a staking base. This staking base would basically listen to the token supply, let's say, the issuing the tokens that are already issued, and then if someone is issuing a token, the tokens would immediately get staked, and then at some point those are claimable. So it seems to me, just from this this section, that what would be needed is one new base contract that enables this staking based on a condition, and then it could inherit from the normal issuance block that we already created, and then the functionality would already be there.
Cool, thank you.
Sorry for missing that.
Okay, are there any more questions? I think we are slightly over time.
Yeah, I would be curious if there's time to what Jeff meant with bonding curve subscriptions. What was meant by that?
Yeah, so kind of looking at TWAMs, time-weighted AMMs, where you can have a bulk order split over multiple blocks. It just strikes me as also one of the key frictions in these tools is the community members aren't necessarily investors. People don't like, or I didn't like, having to like keep an eye on all these prices, figure out when to buy, figure out like do bulk buys. This is all like cognitive overhead. If I could automatically dollar cost average in as like a member to the communities that I value, like if I had, subscribed to the inverter bonding curve at $100 a month. And then each sort of like membership due payment, each subscription payment, you get tokens in return. So it breaks it up automatically over time. And then you can just choose to end that stream if you're no longer supporting, or even reclaim some of your capital if there is a reserve clawback, or maybe, you know, some form of exit liquidity. But having the ability to like set it and forget it, in my mind, would be super helpful. It gives a consistent revenue stream for DAOs. And I'd say revenue stream, you know, a portion of that might be going to reserve, a portion to common pool, but it has continual buys over time, because that was one of the things that really gummed up the TEC, was there was no ongoing purchase of the token. So a lot of the dynamics that they spoke about weren't really manifested in the token design, because there wasn't utility, therefore people weren't buying. But if you had subscription and you said, hey, this is a membership thing, you're growing your, you know, your weight in the community over time. And rather than putting 5K or 10K or however much up front, you just sign up for a stream. And if at any point you find that that community isn't delivering what you thought, then you turn off the stream. But having that continual small purchase over in one-off bulk buys, I feel would help smooth a lot of the purchasing behavior on the curve.
I think another really fascinating use case I've never thought about. So there's definitely something to.
Guys, real quick, that's actually, isn't this a perfect use case also for Bloom? Potentially, like, don't you think, Ata? Like, they enable like community subscriptions to basically the general hub, and like they generate, you know, like they participate in like outreaching like activities, you know, community incentives, hubs, like workshops, etc. Like that would be amazing for them to POC this. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure about the stuff that we are building right now for them, because it's more the, you know, bounty claiming, whatever, but they could probably use something more for the DAO things. I think, yeah, but I think it's a very, very interesting concept, which definitely is worth exploring. Like, yeah, really cool one.
It might be an easier sell for VCs as well, rather than saying, you know, put a huge chunk in now. You just say, hey, we're going to ask that same chunk, but over time, and at any point in that time, you can end the stream if you don't see the value here. So it really makes it like lower stakes, I think, for VCs. And I mean, this is kind of the same as like milestone-based unlocking, but the funds come on a steady basis from their side and get applied on a steady basis through the system. And at any point, if they want to stop the stream or have a clawback, maybe it just lowers the barrier to them saying yes, because they are just saying yes to a smaller amount continuously, rather than a huge lump sum upfront, not knowing if they'll get see a return on that.
Yeah, completely.
I'm sorry, go for it.
Oh no, just quickly, I was going to mention, in case you didn't see it, I dropped a link in the chat for a token weighted backlog, because it sounds like, I mean, I don't know, maybe people are too busy, but it's an opportunity to have like a token signaling what features you guys are building on. In the TEC, we use this token log.xyz. I think there have been some iterations since, and maybe there's better, but it's open source. If you wanted to consider something like that in order to like get signaling from people using Inverter on which features they want to be developed next.
I think another really great idea.
Yeah, I remember token log. Token log is a great tool.
And I definitely gonna sort of save up the whole chat, because there's so many links dropped. So
yeah, actually,
I
is
think
part of
Zoom
the
saves them.
Is the recording? Does the recording save them, or Firefly or something?
Records everything.
I don't
There
know,
should
but
be
I
a text
saw that
file. If you have the Zoom Premium, there should be a text file that you get with the recorded call that has the links.
Yeah, and I saw that the dots menu has an option save chat. So
I have,
to be sure, I'm going to do that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Any more questions, or should we wrap it up? Yeah, I would say closing thoughts. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining and contributing to the space and valuable feedback, as well as all the links. So thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, I'll just kind of join in and say thank you so much for your time, for your intense listening, and all the feedback and the great ideas that have been said during this meeting. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for walking us through this journey. I appreciate you both.